Welcome to Entecom's Food Safety Podcast, designed to bring you tools and tips that will make food safety management a little easier. I'm Janice Giddy, and I look forward to sharing our podcasts with you. Food safety managers often feel overwhelmed and stressed by the many complicated compliance requirements and sometimes feel quite isolated whilst trying to make sense of it all. With these bi-monthly podcasts, Entecom chats to our food safety friends who've been working in the food industry for many years and are keen to share advice, tips and tools to make food safety management a little easier.
I'm Aileen from Entecom Western Cape. Today is a special podcast because I will be chatting to my husband and colleague Rolf Uys around the tricky parts of FSSC22000 version 5. Rolf, tell us about yourself and what qualifies you to give advice on food safety systems and FSSC 22000.
I think probably the fact that I train, troubleshoot, implement FSSC almost every day now. And I think the main difference also is I've been an auditor for over 20 years across the globe. So I've seen probably thousands of quality management systems. So I know what needs to be there and I know what works and doesn't work. So my job really today is to guide everyone into understanding, the new stuff in FSSC and how to actually deal with it.
During this time, many of our clients are getting busy now in converting their FSSC systems to version 5. And they say they are getting the main principles, the theory, but they struggle with the new ISO jargon. Things like context of the organization, risks and opportunities, organizational risks, and so on. Can you shed some light?
The thing is, with previous upgrades of FSSC from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 4.1, it was just add-ons. That's so easy to understand, but now the whole one component, the ISO 22000 component, has changed. Why did it change? Because ISO wants all the ISO standards to look similar. Whether it's 14,000, 17,000, 45,000, the look and feel is starting to look the same. So exactly the same with ISO 22000 is to bring in those stuff that are in the other standard. And this is the jargon things you're talking about, the organizational risks and the risks and opportunities and so on. But if you think about it, it actually adds value. It doesn't make our life more difficult. It adds value. And let's take the context. You need to, as food company, define who you are. It's different whether you're a baby food company or you're a food contact packaging company. The risks are different. The size is different. You need to explain your context. With organizational risk, most of us have always seen our risk assessment as the HACCP plan, where we take a flow diagram. At each step of the flow diagram, we say what the risks are, and that's now risk assessment. But a big hole in this whole process is that we're not looking at the bigger risks. And a good example now happening right at the moment is coronavirus. You can't stick that into HACCP and risk assess it there. It's an organizational risk to the company. That fits into your organizational risks and opportunities. Same with something like food safety culture. It doesn't fit into a HACCP plan. It's, food safety culture is everybody believes in food safety. That's something an organization needs to look at as a whole, and it's an opportunity and it's a risk. So it needs to get put in there, and it adds a lot of value. So much needed, and it will make all of our quality management systems easier. It's not to complicate things, really.
Yeah, it is definitely valuable and needed. But how does one actually do this? Is this just a new procedure that needs to be written? How do you do a context of the organization and organizational risks?
First thing is, what you should not do is the quality manager sits in their office alone with Google and writes up something, and that's the context of the organization. One should involve top management, brainstorm together define who you are as an organization, what the intent of the system is, of the food safety system is, who's the interested parties, what are the needs of our interested parties, what makes us tick as a business, and where does food safety fit in. As simple as that, just defining that. You can do it on a spreadsheet, you can do it on a PowerPoint, on a Word document, and then just condense it back into a format that you can document. In terms of the organizational risk assessment, there you can actually a table, you can design a table that links clauses 4, 6, 8, and 9 together, and just defining what the risks are for the organization, what the control measures are, and so on. And if you do this properly, you cover a lot of work later in the standard.
So should the industry just go through the standard, or where can they get guidance on this?
ISO FSSC22000 has published some guidelines exactly for this on their website in December 2019, freely available. And this document really just goes through the higher level structure, the harmonization of ISO standards, explaining these things, or explaining the organizational risk assessment, the context, and so on, and just making it easy to understand. So definitely use that. Interesting also is what I'm very glad that they did was they clarified CCPs and OPRPs and how to select OPRPs, because that was a nightmare. Each consultant seemed to do their own thing, and there's a lot of inconsistency, and a lot of arguing, and a lot of time wastage on what exactly an OPRP is.
That's fantastic, because it seems wherever I go, each person I speak to has a different definition and opinion about OPRP. So does it actually now clarify step by step how you actually select the OPRPs?
Yep, it does that with a practical example. And so how it works is, we're all used to doing a hazard analysis, where you take a micro hazard or an allergen hazard or a physical hazard, and you see, is it high, medium, or low? Is it significant or not? So you keep on doing that. But what this explains now, you mustn't just do a hazard risk assessment, you must do a control measure risk assessment as well. And this will now define if it's an OPRP or a CCP. Okay, so you take a risk. If it's a significant hazard, you go further and you say, right, let's look at the control measures. And then the control measure is that, and then there's a table in there, a matrix that says, what is the risk of failure of this control measure, and what is the feasibility of detection? And if it's got a high risk of failure and a high feasibility of detection, it's a CCP. And if it's got a low risk of failure and low feasibility of detection, it's a PRP. And then anything in between is an OPRP. Okay, so the mindset change is moving away from a hazard analysis to have a hazard analysis and a risk of control measure failure risk assessment as well. Right, and what this will show, and it's just some examples, it will show things like a pasteurizer has got a high risk of failure, but a high feasibility of detection as well, so it makes the CCP. Things like a strainer, a sieve, will be not so high feasibility of detection correction, so now it brings it to an OPRP. And then there's the PRPs as well. So it just makes it work through the matrix, read this document. It gives a lot of guidance, and it's much easier, and it replaces all those complicated decision trees, so it's logical.
So speaking about decision trees and tables, are you saying this is now wrong because the industry have been using this for many years?
It's not trying to find fault, it's trying to clarify. So I would say if you've got your decision-making process and so on, And it's there to supplement it, to make it easier. Now the problem was in ISO 22000-2005, the way you chose OPRPs is there's a clause 7.4.4, and it's got 7 questions, very complicated questions I have to add, which helps you select an OPRP. Now it's just this little matrix which you now look at this, the risk of failure and the feasibility of detection, and you compare that and you arrive at an OPRP. So I would say don't throw out your old system. Just look at the new one, and when it's time for your next HACCP review, look at this and make the necessary changes.
Okay, cool, perfect. Then lastly, any other pointers on things that are significantly now different in this new version?
Yeah, a couple of people miss clause 7.1.5, the externally developed elements. Sort of brush over that, not really knowing what that means. That means if there's elements in your system which is external, like your food fraud, your TACCP risk assessment, your VASIP, your HACCP codex process, those things, externally developed elements which is not part of FSSC, you just need to define where it comes from and that it's legitimate. All right, so that's often missed. And then also, I would say things like clause 10.2, continuous improvement. You actually need to show continuous improvement, and this clause ties everything together. And if you do all your risk assessments properly and you show how it's controlled and link that to management review, and how things get better, this clause falls into place automatically.
Right. Thanks, Rolf. I've really learned a lot, and I'm really glad that I have you and my team. I'm sure the industry will really benefit from your practical advice.
Great. Yeah, just keep your ears to the ground and have a look at this document. It will really make your food safety management system better.
Thank you for listening to our podcast and hope that the content was valuable to you. Keep a watch out for our next bi-monthly food safety podcast sharing tips and advice from food industry experts.